one plate of meat. Two reactions. In one country, it's dinner. In another, it's a crime, eat beef in parts of India, and you could face real legal trouble. The cow is sacred there. Eat dog meat in the West, and you'll trigger the same horror. It's banned in many countries outright. Serve pork to a Jewish or Muslim household, and you've broken a rule that's over 3,000 years old. None of this is about biology. A cow, a dog, and a pig are all, nutritionally speaking, just meat. So why do humans, a species capable of eating almost anything, draw such fierce emotional lines around a handful of specific animals? The answer isn't superstition. It's a mix of ancient survival instinct, religious law, deep psychology, and something scientists call disgust, one of the most powerful, least understood emotions the human brain has ever produced. Let's start with the most obvious and widespread taboo in much of the modern world: dogs and cats. In most Western countries, the idea of eating a dog or a cat isn't just unappealing, it's treated as genuinely disturbing, and in many countries, it's outright illegal. Researchers who study this taboo point to a clear psychological explanation. Companionship. Dogs and cats occupy a unique social role in many cultures. They live inside our homes, sleep in our beds, and are treated less like livestock and more like family members. Anthropologists studying human-animal relationships have found that once an animal is mentally categorized as a companion rather than a resource, the emotional and moral barrier against eating it becomes extremely difficult to cross, regardless of the animal's actual nutritional value. This isn't universal, though, and that's exactly what makes the topic so interesting. In parts of East Asia, dog meat has historically been consumed, tied to different cultural relationships with the animal, though the practice has become increasingly controversial and restricted in recent years as attitudes shift globally. This reveals something important. The companion animal taboo isn't hardwired biology. It's learned, culturally reinforced, and can genuinely differ from one society to the next. Horses fall into a similar, slightly less intense category, particularly in English-speaking countries. Horse meat is taboo across much of the Anglo-Saxon world, largely tied to the horse's historical role as a working partner and companion rather than livestock. Even though horse meat is eaten without controversy in several European countries, like France and parts of Central Asia, the common thread across all of this: taboos around companion animals aren't really about the meat itself. They're about the relationship humans have built with that particular species, and how emotionally difficult it becomes to mentally reclassify a friend as food. There's a second, closely related psychological force at work: our unusual capacity for empathy toward animals we perceive as intelligent, expressive, or emotionally similar to ourselves. Researchers studying food taboos have pointed out that humans are unusually empathetic compared to many other species, capable of imagining how another creature might think or feel. And this capacity seems to directly shape which animals end up on the don't eat list. Predatory animals with sharp teeth, expressive faces, and complex hunting behavior. Wolves, big cats, bears are far less commonly eaten across cultures than passive grazing animals like cattle, sheep, and goats, even in societies without any formal religious prohibition against it. Interestingly, formal religious law often reinforces this same instinct rather than creating it from scratch. Jewish kosher law explicitly limits acceptable meat to chew the cud, cloven hoof animals, a category that automatically excludes predators like cats, dogs, and bears. Islamic dietary law contains a similar principle, explicitly prohibiting predatory animals with fangs or birds of prey with talons. In both traditions, the underlying pattern is strikingly similar. Animals that hunt that display recognizable intelligence or emotional behavior tend to be pushed firmly into taboo territory. Whether through explicit religious commandment or simple cultural discomfort, this same empathetic instinct extends to animals believed to carry human-like qualities in local folklore. Among the Mbengela Bayaka, hunter-gatherer community in the Congo Basin, some individuals avoid eating the tree hyrax specifically because its cry at night is said to resemble a human voice, with consuming the animal believed to invite illness. The biological reality of the animal barely matters here. What matters is the perceived resemblance to something human and the emotional discomfort that resemblance creates. While psychology explains a lot, Some of the world's most powerful food taboos come from formal religious doctrine. Rules written down, codified, and followed by billions of people across many centuries. The prohibition of pork in both Judaism and Islam stands as one of the most well-known examples in the world. In Jewish kosher law and Islamic halal law, pigs are explicitly classified as forbidden based on specific religious criteria surrounding the animal's biology and behavior. This shared prohibition, appearing independently across two major world religions, has led to extensive historical debate over its origins. Some scholars point to practical health concerns in the ancient world, such as disease risks associated with poorly cooked pork in hot climates, while others emphasize that the taboo functioned primarily as a marker of religious and cultural identity, distinguishing a community through what it refused to eat. In Hinduism, the treatment of cows takes taboo to an entirely different level, not simply forbidden, but actively sacred. Cows are deeply revered in Hindu culture, associated with life-giving qualities such as milk, and connected to important religious symbolism. As a result, beef consumption is avoided by practicing Hindus, and cow protection carries significant cultural and religious weight across large parts of India. What's fascinating about religious food taboos is how effectively they serve a second, less obvious purpose beyond spiritual belief: group identity. Anthropologists note that shared food restrictions strengthen a group's sense of belonging and cultural distinction, creating an instantly recognizable boundary between us and them, reinforced every single day, at every single meal, for an entire lifetime. Some of the strangest seeming food taboos actually turn out to have surprisingly practical roots, developed long before anyone understood the science behind them. Historically, some researchers have proposed that certain ancient meat restrictions may be connected to genuine health risks, specific animals being more likely, in certain environments, to carry parasites or diseases dangerous to humans, particularly before refrigeration, thorough cooking standards, and modern food safety existed. While the exact medical reasoning behind any single ancient taboo is often debated among historians and scientists, the broader pattern holds. Many food taboos likely began as practical survival strategies, encoded into religious or cultural rules long before the actual biological explanation existed. Researchers studying food taboos more broadly describe this as a kind of protective function. Societies developing rules, sometimes without fully accurate scientific reasoning, that nonetheless helped prevent people from repeatedly consuming something genuinely risky in their specific environment. Even when the original medical logic doesn't perfectly hold up under modern scrutiny, the taboo itself often persists for generations, wrapped in religious or cultural meaning long after its practical origin has been forgotten. This same survival logic extends to what researchers call famine food associations: animals or foods that become culturally tainted simply because they were historically associated with hardship, starvation, or desperation. An animal eaten only during famine can become permanently stigmatized in a culture's collective memory, avoided even generations later during times of plenty, long after anyone remembers exactly why the association began in the first place. Beyond religion and survival logic, there's a deeper psychological mechanism at work: disgust, one of the most powerful and least logical emotional responses in the entire human behavioral toolkit. Psychologists and anthropologists studying disgust have found that it functions as an extremely effective learning mechanism, precisely because it doesn't require personal experience to take hold. A person doesn't need to actually get sick from eating a particular animal to develop a lasting disgust response toward it. Cultural transmission alone, through stories, warnings, and social reinforcement from childhood onward, is enough to permanently install a powerful aversion. This explains why food taboos feel so instinctive and non-negotiable to the people who hold them, even when there's no personal first-hand experience of harm behind the belief. If someone from a culture where dog meat is taboo were presented with a plate of it, researchers note the near-universal reaction would be immediate, visceral rejection. A response that feels biological and automatic, even though it was actually built entirely through cultural learning, not instinct. This is also why food taboos are remarkably resistant to logical argument. pointing out that a taboo animal is nutritionally identical to an accepted one rarely changes anyone's mind, because disgust doesn't operate on nutritional logic in the first place. It operates on deeply ingrained cultural categorization, reinforced since early childhood, wrapped in emotional and often moral weight that feels like objective truth rather than to a specific culture. Perhaps no example illustrates the sheer arbitrariness of food taboos better than insects. In the United States and much of the Western world, eating insects is treated as unusual at best, revolting at worst. Yet, across large parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, insects are a completely normal, widely consumed source of protein, prepared and eaten without any of the disgust reactions so common in Western culture. There's no meaningful nutritional reason for this divide. Insects are, in many cases, an efficient, protein-rich, environmentally sustainable food source. The difference is purely cultural conditioning, built up over generations of exposure or avoidance, with absolutely no connection to actual health risk or nutritional inferiority. The same cultural arbitrariness shows up with rats. Certain cultures include rats as an accepted, sometimes even valued, part of the diet, while in the United States and much of the West, the idea provokes immediate revulsion. Once again, the difference isn't biological. It's entirely a product of what each culture has decided, often for reasons buried generations deep, to categorize as food versus not food. This comparison reveals something important about every taboo we've discussed so far. There's rarely anything universal or objectively correct about which animals humans eat. Every culture on Earth has simply drawn its own lines, shaped by history, religion, environment, and psychology, and to the people living inside that culture, those lines almost always feel completely natural, obvious, and unquestionable. Food taboos don't just shape individual behavior. In many documented cases, they've had a measurable impact on entire ecosystems and wildlife conservation. Among some Native American traditions, including several Hopi clans, individuals are traditionally prohibited from hunting or eating their specific clan or totem animal, with Bear Clan members avoiding bears, and Deer Clan members avoiding deer, based on spiritual kinship rather than any practical survival calculation. Similar totem-based restrictions appear among other indigenous communities, including certain Ojibwe traditions. Researchers studying the relationship between cultural food taboos and wildlife conservation have found that these restrictions, whatever their original spiritual purpose, frequently function as informal, community-enforced conservation systems, protecting specific species from overhunting simply because an entire community has collectively agreed for generations not to touch them. This creates a fascinating dynamic. Religious and cultural food taboos, developed long before anyone had a formal concept of ecological sustainability, may have functioned as an early, decentralized form of wildlife protection. Species surviving and thriving in certain regions, specifically because cultural belief, not government regulation, kept them permanently off the menu. So why don't we eat some animals? After all this, the psychology, the religious law, the ancient survival logic, the science of disgust. The honest answer is that there's no single reason. It's a layered combination of companionship, empathy, religious identity, ancient practical wisdom, and deeply conditioned cultural disgust, all reinforcing each other until a taboo feels less like a rule and more like an unquestionable fact of nature. But maybe the most important insight from all of this is simply how little of it is actually universal. The cow considered sacred in one culture is dinner in another. The dog treated as family in one country is a source of meat in another. The insect eaten without hesitation across huge parts of the world is treated as revolting in the West, despite offering excellent nutrition. None of these choices are wrong, and none of them are simply natural. They're the product of thousands of years of religion, survival experience, empathy, and deeply ingrained cultural learning, each one shaping, generation after generation, exactly what ends up on a plate and exactly what never could. In the end, the line between food and not food was never really about biology at all. It was always about meaning, the invisible, deeply human system of belief, memory, and emotion that decides, long before any of us are even old enough to question it, exactly what belongs on our plate.